Welcome, everybody, to Be Your Own Therapist. This is a 60-minute discussion that are easygoing. Introduction to the Buddhist approach to the mind. We have Martin Ström. He came to the Dharma in 2003 and at the feet of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and then turned around and opened his own center in Stockholm, which is pretty dang amazing. That is the Yeshin Norbu FPMT Center. So as Lama Zopa says, we can mold our mind into any shape we like. So what shape are we going for tonight?
Yeah, that's remain to be seen. I think the best shape is maybe no shape, like open, spacious, and vast. I don't know, is that a shape? um, yeah, and so I don't know. Would you mind doing the pulling up the refuge prayer and all that? That would be fantastic, and go through that. Good start.
Taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye Chodam Soki Chonam La Janju Bardu Dagni Kapsu Chi Dagi Chonyen Gipe Sonam Gi Drola Pencher Sange Drupar Shok.
Okay. Um, yes, so I think, like I usually do, I think it's good to start the session off with just a brief meditation to allow ourselves to settle and, yeah, just it's always good to bring a little bit of presence and relaxation and clarity to these kind of things, and take a moment to let go of whatever we've been up to throughout the day. Let go of the busyness and the past, the future, the worries, the concerns, as much as possible, and just allow ourselves to drop into our present experience. So start by just allowing your body to find a comfortable position, first of all, and just maybe feel into your body, this field of tactile sensations. And it's a good way of grounding ourselves, just allowing attention to leave the conceptual story, the thinking, the worrying, and just kind of like you pour water into a glass, you pour your awareness into the body, this tactile field. Just notice whatever's going on. And also, as a way of grounding yourself, you can connect with the breathing and go as low in the body as possible. See if you can feel the breath in the stomach. Maybe you can even connect with the breath further down, like the pelvic area. Just rest your attention on the rhythm of the breathing. Allowing the body just to settle into the natural state without us interfering. Just observe, pay close attention. And allowing the mind to gently settle as well, along with the body, along with the respiration. There are a lot of thoughts, concerns, whatever happens in the mind. See if you can just, as you breathe out, you can take the opportunity to just release them into space. Breathing in and noticing what's in the mind, and then breathing out and allowing it all to just release. Not grasping onto anything. And then finally, just bring your attention to your own motivation for joining this discussion this evening. Whatever that motivation is. Maybe it is to understand yourself better, understand the mind, the world, others, so that we can become more skillful in being who we are, bring forth our innermost potential, to ease our own suffering, cultivate joy, but also to bring that very same thing to others as much as possible. The remedy for all ailments is awareness, clarity, insight, and compassion. And all those things can be cultivated, explored, enhanced. Okay, and with that, we can end this brief meditation and turn our attention to our discussion. Yeah, and as usual, I thought I would just share a few things. It tend to be what I'm sharing tends to be whatever's alive for myself. So it is a bit. There's no structure to whatever I'm sharing in these sessions. It is literally just whatever I happen to be, whatever I happen to be thinking about, or whatever happens to be alive in my my own situation, I guess. So, so I'll just start with I had an interesting experience yesterday. We were going to have me and my wife, Maria. We were just going for a walk and around a nearby lake here, and going there, we had to go under a train track underpass, and so we came up to that, and then the underpass had two sections, and that were divided in the middle. So there were no signs or anything, but so we just went for the closest section. And as we were walking down there, a car comes behind us, and we realized that we're actually on the car part of the underpass. And so we wave a little sorry, and go back up and head for the pedestrian section. But the interesting thing is the reaction of the man in the car. He was delayed by maybe, I don't know, 10 seconds or something, and he was just fuming. He was yelling in his car, and as he was driving off, we could hear him yelling, which it seems very unfortunate for him that that was his reaction. Obviously we made a mistake and walked on the wrong part of the this underpass, but and also he it's not like we can choose our own reactions. If anger arises very strongly, there's in that moment it just arises. We can't stop it from arising, and obviously he got very angry. But the thing is that there would be, for him, there would be this conceptual story justifying his anger, probably about how stupid and horrible the people in front of his car was. And so anger pops up, but then there's this story just justifying the anger. And then underlying that conceptual story from a Buddhist perspective will always be mistaken view of reality, a view of dualism, a view of a self-existing me or I, in this case, which is the me or I that's being wronged, and so on. So, but my point is that even though anger arises in us and everybody, and unless we're enlightened, I guess. So a couple of sessions ago, I talked about how important it is to be able to meet strong emotions, or the energy of strong emotions in the body as they rise. And so there's this the conceptual story and the emotional experience. They're kind of, like Venerable Bina says, they're like a pureed soup. They're just this big mess, and it's really important to kind of tease them apart. And a good first step of doing that is to turn our attention to the energetic manifestation of emotion, and let go of the story for a while and just stay with whatever has arisen, which makes it then easier to then turn our attention to the conceptual story. But and so both are really valid, but it's also really good to become aware as much as possible about the story we are telling ourselves when anger arises. I had another experience this very morning. I was handing in my car to be fixed or repaired, and as I get there, I asked them, casually, how long will you need the car for? And I expect, a couple of hours, maybe this afternoon. And they say, yeah, we need it for a week. But I realize that's really problematic because I can't, not have a car for a week. Why didn't anyone tell me? And then it turns out it's because, if it's non-insurance customers, private customers, as I was, then they had experiences in the past when people don't show up. So they order parts and they just sit there. And so now their new policy is to have people bring their car in, then they order parts and the person's car will sit there. So I was like questioning this policy, and I was, anger certainly arose because this was messing with my week and my plans and so on. But fortunately, I could catch myself, and then first of all, I can see that directing my anger towards this poor girl, new at the job, that wouldn't help because it wasn't her policy. She was just bound by it, and then it had a good resolution anyway, so I could just pay for the parts and take my car home, and then they'd call me to bring it back. But yeah, it was just interesting to see anger arising, but then just try to catch myself in that and start to challenge, what am I actually telling myself in this moment, and is it helpful, and so on and so forth. And personally, I find that can really help. I had this period in my meditation practice. This actually quite a few number of years ago now, but I was basically meditating on a mantra, and I came up with a mantra myself. The mantra was, I am wrong. So that was for a while, that was part of my meditation practice, to sit with telling myself that I am wrong. Because even though we always feel so justified, especially when anger arises, we are, in fact, from a Buddhist perspective, always wrong in our assessment. And the reason we're wrong is that we all suffer from at least the most basic of delusions, which is the delusion of separation, the delusion of having this intrinsically existing me or self that we're grasping to, that we're protecting, that and yeah, we won't go there today, but if we start looking for that me or that self, then we won't be able to find it, because it's just as real as Santa Claus. So therefore, if I tell myself I am wrong, well, I'm always right in saying that I'm wrong. But for me, that was a really good meditation practice, because I think my main poison, or my main mental affliction, my main challenge has always been, I would say, has always been arrogance. Always feeling that I'm right, having a tendency to feel, I wouldn't necessarily say feel superior, but at least knowing better than people. When I was 5 years old, I apparently asked my grandmother what I asked her was, what does Besserwisser mean? Which is, it's German for know-it-all. So someone had been calling me that, and I went to ask my grandmother, what is a know-it-all? What does that mean? So I think I've always suffered from the sense of knowing everything and being in the right. So for me, that was a really good practice. And within the Tibetan tradition, there's also the tradition of Lojong, or mind training, which is a practice specifically designed or targeted at challenging, the stories we tell ourselves. Because again, if the single culprit is that self-existing I, or well, the grasping to it. So all our miseries, all our problems can actually be traced back to that. And the conceptual stories that we tell ourselves, that all of them stem from that. So the Lojong practices are all designed to challenge that story and find ways of turning them around 180 degrees. And did I just see a? So I'm just talking. Did I see a hand raised right now, or was that unintentional? Anyone have any questions so far? Or should, otherwise I'll go on for a bit more. Yeah. So the practice of Lojong, it's usually traced back to Atisha, but there's these slogans that are used to be memorized and practiced, and used to target like our erroneous thinking. So there's also a very famous set of slogans by Geshe Shikawa, a set of 59 slogans that trace back to Atisha. There's what you usually call the 8 verses of mind training of Geshe Langbi Tangpa. And even a lot of times a previous teacher named Shantideva is also sometimes considered to be within this realm of mind training practices. But they're all about looking differently at whatever's going on. So for example, one such slogan might be to, if there's someone that you view as an enemy, or you might call them a difficult person, someone who's causing you a lot of problems, or someone in whom you've placed great trust, and now they're betraying you, whatever it might be, someone who's really pushing all our buttons and really triggering us. In that situation, we should view that person as our most precious teacher. And when the ego hears that, it just rebels, because that's insane, because they did this and that and the other, and they're a horrible person, and they're hurting everyone, and blah blah blah. But in fact, what that slogan is aimed at is the fact that, okay, so you have this intention to become a more patient person, a more loving person, and so on. And what could be better than to practice on than someone who's causing you some real grief and problems? It's like, when you go to the gym, you want the heavy weights. Otherwise, you're not building muscle. If you just walk around with the puny, tiny weights, nothing's really going to happen. So it's kind of the same here. But then, if we take that metaphor a step further, as with physical training, we don't want to overextend ourselves, because then we'll end up just hurting ourselves. So it's also a gradual practice. It's something to lean into, and some of these slogans can be really challenging. So we need to approach them with self-compassion and just knowing our own limits and boundaries, but also knowing that those limits and those boundaries can always be moved outwards, but it's in a gradual, stepwise process. And I remembered a few. So just from my own life, a few times when this kind of thing has been really helpful. The first one I remember was actually, and this is interesting because it was before I came in contact with the Dharma, before I had any Buddhist teachings. I remember this was back in middle school, and I was on my way to school, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but I was in for some kind of scolding, or I probably done something I shouldn't have, or yeah, whatever it was, I was really anxious, and it was, stressed about going to school that day because I knew I was in for something unpleasant. And then I remember the thought came to me that, well, there's, in any situation, if you can change it, then you should go ahead and you do whatever you can to change it. But being upset and worried and angry about it isn't going to help. And then, well, in the others, other circumstances that you can't do anything about the situation. So then, and then why would you worry? Why would you be angry? That's just, to no use. And I don't know. And that thought is actually, it's straight from Shantideva. So uh, I don't claim that I came up with it. I must have heard it somewhere, read it somewhere, picked it up, but it came to me in that situation. And I thought, well, yeah, I have the option to not go to school. I could do that, but that's going to result in a whole host of uh, unfortunate things that I don't want to cause. So yeah, I have to go to school. And if I go to school, I have to sit through this scolding. So I just have to face up to it, but being worried and angry about it isn't going to help. So, and I remember how that really, it really calmed me down. And the silly thing is, I think the thing I was afraid of turned out it never happened in the end. So I never got that scolding. So then I could look back and see how utterly useless my worry had been, because now I was just worrying about a fantasy that I was just projecting this catastrophic scenario in the future that turned out to never happen. So that was one example from my own life where that kind of thinking was really helpful. Another one, this is years later, when around the year 2000, I started a company with a few friends, and one of them ended up being the it wasn't really, it was more of an acquaintance, but he ended up being the CEO, and he ended up being a extremely challenging person, because he had a tendency to lie and manipulate, and he was rather narcissistic, and he was causing all sorts of problems for our company. And this was causing me, in turn, a lot of anger and grief and frustration, and he occupied a lot of my thoughts. And yeah, and so then this was around the time when I then did get in contact with the Dharma, and I did start to read about those things. And I did read Shantideva's Bodhicharyavatara. I did read Geshe Langpa Tangpa's 8 verses and mind training, and I did there come across this idea of viewing my enemies as my greatest teachers. So I did end up trying that with this person, which was really hard. I didn't want to do that at all. So then I also supplemented that with I had been introduced to loving kindness meditation, where the first step, you cultivate loving kindness to yourself, and then to a dear friend, a close person, then to a stranger, and then to a difficult person. So this man, he was always in that 4th category. He was always like, the person I brought in as an enemy or as a challenging person in that 4th step of the loving kindness meditation. But then over time, I noticed a real big shift. So having just contemplating and using, these mind training verses, there was another one that was really helpful at the time, which is drive all blames into one, which means, again, the only culprit is the, the ego, or the inherently existing self, or the grasping to the self. That's where you should put all your blame. Don't blame others. Don't blame the outside. Blame that, and then act accordingly. So, those were the main 2 things I was practicing, or 3 things I was practicing: drive all blames into one, view your enemies as your greatest teachers and doing this loving kindness meditation. And it really, I don't remember now how long time this took, but the way I viewed this man started to shift, and then I could suddenly approach him with much more patience. I could compassion would arise because I could see, all the ways he was suffering and struggling to a large extent because of the way he was in the world and the way he was acting. So then, compassion arose, some patience, and he started, in my mind, he started to change. And then with that, my relationship to him also started to change. And then, so the problem was that now I no longer had anyone for that fourth stage of my loving kindness practice, because he was no longer this challenging, horrible outer enemy for me. So that was, but that was a problem that I could accept. Yeah, and yeah, like Lama Zopa says, there is, or I guess Lama Zopa said, he's no longer with us, but he would say that you can't defeat your enemies in the outside. Well, and we do try. We go to war to try and defeat our enemies, but then new ones will just pop up. So the only way to defeat our enemies is on the inside. If we can transform them on the inside, then we can get rid of all enemies. We can actually get rid of all challenging people. We can get rid of all challenging situations, but not by fixing the people, not by fixing the world. That's not how we get rid of them. We get rid of them by transforming ourselves. Because the Buddha doesn't have any enemies. The Dalai Lama doesn't have any enemies. The Dalai Lama was and his people were tortured and murdered and exiled from their country. But the Dalai Lama does not have any enemies. The Chinese are not his enemies. That doesn't mean that he won't work tirelessly to change the situation. But it just means that when he views the Chinese, he views them with patience and compassion and love, not anger, animosity, hate, and a need for vengeance and all the other things that come with that. Yeah, so I just wanted to share these thoughts because, like I said a few sessions back, I talked about just staying with difficult emotions in the body, and how so many problems that we experience comes from our inability to do that. So bringing clarity to an awareness to our experience, whatever it is. But then I thought I'd bring this aspect in as well, because even though we cannot change how our emotional response is in the moment, if anger arises, then anger arises. But we can bring awareness to it. We can bring clarity to it, and we can try to prevent ourselves to act in an unskillful way. But then the next step will be to turn our attention to the stories we are telling ourselves and start to really challenge them. And know that we can always, there's always a different perspective. There's always a broader perspective. There's always a deeper perspective to what's going on. And if we intentionally try to look for that, so maybe, we got really angry, we did some things we're not proud of, but then once we settle down, we can revisit, okay, what did I actually tell myself in this situation? And is it actually true? Does it actually make sense? Is it actually helpful? How could I look at it differently? And then work that through. And then the next time we're in the same kind of situation, it's more likely that we'll remember these contemplations that we did, and then we can catch ourselves quicker. And then we work it through again. And the next time it will become more and more habitual. So our inclination, our tendency to immediately challenge the story will become stronger and stronger. And then we'll start to transform how we view things. And then we will kind of pull the rug out from underneath the afflictions and the negative emotions that arise from all these stories that we're telling ourselves, the interpretations we make, the filters that we have on the things we perceive. And then we can start to to bring the blame back home. And because we're just projectile vomiting blame all over the place, which is not very helpful. We need to assume responsibility for our own experience and our own world, in a sense, because the only way we can transform it is from within. Yeah, so I think that's what has been alive for me recently, and that's what I wanted to share. So with that, maybe we can open up the floor and see if there are any questions, comments, or whatever you have.
So I am really new here. I joined the center in Santa Fe a few months ago, but I really appreciated this discussion and what you shared. One of the things that brought up for me is the idea when something happens or we have someone in our life like you described that is just pushing all the wrong buttons or all the right buttons. It's kind of like we're closed because we think we know the way that things should be. So we're not being open to the possibility of what might arise. And I don't know why this came up for me as you were talking about the Dalai Lama. Of course, everything that the Tibetan people went through, like I would not wish that on anyone. And I also wonder, would I be exposed to Buddhism in the way that I am now had he not been exiled? Right. So it's like even out of something awful, there's potential, there's some other possibility that if he had been like, really upset and the Chinese are my enemies, and it's like there's something about being open, being aware, having that compassion, and then there's still like a bigger picture, a bigger, broader story. And I'm not saying, not even pretending to know that because he was exiled, this and this and that happened, but it's like, well, there was some impact that negative thing possibly became a positive thing. And so kind of being open to that on our own lives, like what am I closing myself off to by just being in that mad state when somebody upsets me or some situation isn't what I want it to be? And it's like there's some interesting potential that I'm just not open to, if any of that made sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. What you just shared reminded me of maybe this might be, I don't know, 15, 20 years back. The Dalai Lama was visiting Sweden, where I'm from, and there was one of those moderated discussions on stage with the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop of Sweden. So really nice conversation. But then the moderator asked the question. So this was back at the time of the Iraq War. I'm really bad with chronology, but anyway, so the Swedish Archbishop was asked about the war, and he just condemned it, said it's horrible, it's bad for this and that reason, and George W. Bush is a horrible person, and blah blah blah. And then the Dalai Lama was asked the very same question about the war, and the Dalai Lama said, well, it's so easy, maybe, good. There has been some, and he said he personally knew George W. Bush, and he said he's not a bad person, and there is some good intention behind this, and who knows, you never know what the war will lead to in the long term. Maybe there will be positive consequences. It's very difficult to tell. I mean, it's obvious that people are suffering, but in the bigger picture, you really can't tell. But then he said that he said also the violence is very tricky. So it's not usually the best way of achieving a good result is not violence. But then again, you never know. So the point is that his answer was not this straight off condemnation and it's all bad, bad, bad. It was much more nuanced and in a sense much deeper and wiser. He was acknowledging the horrendousness of what was going on, but he was also open for the possibility that something good might come from it, and he was open for the possibility that the people who initiated it, although misguided, actually had some good intentions, so they're not necessarily horrible people either. So I think being aware of that long-term, broader perspective, it's almost it can be so challenging, but it's really wise, I think. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
I think, well, what came up for me the entire time I was a little fixated on what happens when, or how do you stop yourself from, all right, now you've said something stupid and you're continuing to be angry, and now you've realized, oh, I'm an idiot, I'm angry, I don't need to be acting like this, but then continuing it. That's some that just hits like, and you're thinking to yourself, why am I doing this? But continuing on. That's
yeah. I think the one thing that can be really helpful is to think about if this was, if you had this really dear friend, and that person made a mistake, that person messed up somehow, and then how would you treat your friend if they came to you and said, I made a big boo-boo, and you agree that, yeah, oof, that was not good, but how would you treat them? How would you talk to them? What would you say to them in that situation?
And treating yourself a little bit nicer might be the answer.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, would you tell yourself that you're an idiot and you shouldn't do this and this and that and the other, and you bring out the whip and hit yourself over the head. But if it was that dear friend, you would be kind and supportive, and it's okay, we all make mistakes, and don't worry about it. And so you'd be very kind to your friend, and you're being really horrible and nasty to yourself. And just recognizing that, and see if you can cultivate a more loving way of relating to yourself. And again, that's also a practice, but it can certainly be done over time. And so Lama Yeshe had this little pith instruction of, the camera's not zoomed in too much, but if you you just put your hands on your chest, or you imagine you put your hand on your shoulder, you imagine Lama Yeshe or Dalai Lama coming up to you and just putting a hand on your shoulder, and then you just tell yourself, relax, dear, it's okay. So that's the pith instruction. Relax, dear, it's okay. And having that be the place we go to when these thoughts just assail us over and over again, and they refuse to go away, and we're just there's one mistake, we can't let it go. So I think a good place to go to is try to find that compassionate approach to ourselves, and try to just be gentle, recognizing that everyone makes mistakes. It's a very human thing. It's not a big problem. And also, if you look back, it looks so big right now, but okay, how would this look in a day or a week or a month or year or 10 lifetimes from now? It's not going to matter. Whatever it is, it's just completely insignificant. So just like also putting it in its right perspective, because that mistake, it seems so big, it's just in our face, it's huge, it's important, but not really important. We just and we carry on, and then we won't have to wait that long, and we'll fuck up again. It's just it's just how things are.
Annie, did you have a question?
Yes. Hi, Martin. I wondered, do you have any strategies for letting things go? It's easy to say, let go, but sometimes it just doesn't leave the mind. Like, what would be some strategies you suggest?
Yeah, so there are I mean, the first thing that is really helpful is to cultivate what's called if you do what's called shamatha or shina meditation, where you cultivate the mind's ability to be focused with or present with whatever you choose. So and that's usually you work with the breath or some inner object, but just bringing your attention to something, and when you get distracted, you bring your attention back, and over time that capacity gets strengthened. So then the idea is that when these troubling thoughts arise, rather than trying to make them go away, which is really difficult, we can just turn our attention to something that we choose. So it might be, it's, especially if we're engaged with something. So we're engaged with a conversation, then we turn our attention to that person and just allow that thought, it might not go away, but it's kind of like when you're in a cocktail party, and you're having a conversation with someone, and there's millions or hundreds of conversations going on around you, this bus, but you're not paying attention to that. You can't make it go away. You can't have everyone shut up, but you focus on what's important, and you direct your attention to that, and then you just kind of carry on. So you do what you do, and then you just allow that thought to be there. So that's one approach. Another approach can be, especially if you do this in meditation, is to turn your attention, your awareness to, and again, there are these two aspects. You can turn your attention to the emotions that this thought, this clingy, sticky, not going away thought, the emotions that it's causing to arise in your body, and just pay attention to the energetic field of that, and try to go deeper and deeper into what's actually manifesting in your body. Or you can do the other thing, which I talked about today, is to turn your sharp wisdom to that thought, and analyze it deeper, and look at it from different perspectives, see if it makes sense. And sometimes when you do that, you can find the thought kind of just evaporate. It's like the thought is if you imagine like a projection onto smoke, it looks very heavy and real, but then if you go into it, it just dissolves into vapor. And yeah, and I realize that when I say all these things, it sounds very easy. It's usually not very easy, but the answer is, I think, always awareness. If you can bring as much awareness to yourself, to the thought, to all aspects of your experience, then usually and eventually that thought will go away. And as long as it doesn't go away, then that's the time to just cultivate patience and self-compassion. And yeah, okay, it seems like it's like we have these hits of the week playing in our head. Thich Nhat Hanh calls it the non-stop thinking radio station that we're tuned into. But the programming changes. That's also good to remember. It's not the same sticky thought one week to the next. So from that perspective, all we need to do is just wait, and the thought will go away on its own. So not making too much of a problem out of it, not giving it more power over us than necessary, not infusing it with too much reality, I guess. So that, those might be some strategies. I don't know if that was sounded at all helpful.
No, thank you. It was.
That brought up something for me. Feeding that demon, feeding that story, getting caught up in that. I'm going to tell myself over and over again how I've been wronged and how I've been, how dare they, and continuing to feed that and not maybe standing in front of it or, somehow getting it to turn off that radio, 24/7 radio. Woe is me.
Do you have you found any strategies that are like helpful for doing that, or anything you found useful?
Have a really good friend that knocks you upside the head and says, knock it off. You're telling the same story again. The only thing that I've had. I've got a great friend I can share her with the world.
I'm not sure if this is relevant. I think what came up for me when I believe Annie was sharing kind of the examples, maybe not when we've been wronged by someone else or we feel wronged, but like where we feel we made a mistake and we're just ruminating. I think more like in the therapy world, outside of Buddhism, the thing that sometimes comes up is the feeling of shame, where you don't feel like you did something wrong. You feel like you are wrong. And I think if you can remember, it's not you, it's the little thing, and little things can be changed, or it's somehow separate from you, it hopefully becomes a little bit easier to let go, versus when you just see yourself as a wrong human being. Then how do you fix that? That becomes more overwhelming, just more difficult to overcome.
Yeah, and that is actually that is actually a deep Buddhist point as well. So one of the and here's another thing that we can definitely do to let go of these sticky thoughts, and that's purification practice. And if you're new, Claudia, maybe you haven't been introduced to that concept, but it's
I've done it twice
basically,
this week.
sorry?
I've done it twice this week. It's amazing.
Oh, wonderful. There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah. There's been like an online evening purification meditation that I just found to be very useful personally.
Yeah. And I mean, the idea there is so what we try to do is to cultivate regret, which is different from shame or guilt. So regret is just having the clarity to see that, I did this thing. It's created, bad karma for myself. It's hurt others. So that wasn't a very skillful thing to do. And just like, if you've ingested poison, you regret having ingested poison because it's going to harm you and others, mainly yourself, actually. But thinking, oh, I'm such a bad, horrible person because I ingested this poison, that's not going to help. It's just going to be really debilitating and actually lower the chances of you changing your behavior in the future. So yeah, so it's really that when we fuse that story about what happened with the story about who we are and they become one, that's the problem. Yeah, so that's actually a really, really valid point. I guess the Christians say it's this, we shouldn't conflate the sin with the sinner. That's a good one. So it's the same kind of idea where, yeah, we might have sinned, but I don't think we're bad to the core because we make mistakes.
But I do like that idea that you just described with regret. I'm starting to get the sense that so many things in Buddhism are just like a teachable moment, a way to learn a skill, a way to, I don't know, I guess just improve yourself with all the teachings, so that, especially that part of the purification with regret, because you don't take it in the same way. It's not something that's going to be with you forever. So, yeah. And I don't know, maybe I didn't go to church enough to Christian churches. I didn't ever get the same vibe there. Separating the sin from the sinner. It's like, no, it's still you. You sinned. You're the sinner.
Your only hope is to ask forgiveness.
And that feels different because then someone else is in charge of that versus you taking action and learning from your mistake.
Yeah, I mean, Buddhism is basically one big toolbox. And, it has the premise that at your very core, you're absolutely pure. And then there's this shit that is covering that purity up. And we need to kind of own that, all the muck and the mud, because it's actually there because we put it there. Not in a guilt way, but just in a very practical way. If you sow apple seeds, you'll get apple trees. If you sow something else, you get something else. And if you don't tend your garden, it's going to be overgrown and messy. That's it's that principle. So it's just a set of methods to apply to purify and remove deeper and deeper layers of misconceptions and confusion. And what you find at the bottom of it all is this radiant luminosity, purity, compassion, and wisdom that's already been, it's there. So it's like the opposite of original sin. It's like original purity. And yeah, in these sessions, I try to present a few tools from the toolbox, and some of them might be applicable in someone's situation, some of them not so much, but that's as a Buddhist practitioner, that's our job to figure out which ones are useful and then just apply them in life. It's very pragmatic. You try out your hammer and see what it's good for, and then if you don't need a hammer, just pick something else. So it's method. It's not ultimate truth in a sense. It's just whatever works to gain more clarity, understanding, wisdom, and compassion. Yeah, and that brings us to the full hour. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And yeah, I'll send you off for your toolbox, and you go apply it, and I will go apply my toolbox, and hopefully we'll figure some stuff out